Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Candid Conversations about Network Marketing. Hi, I'm BK, and as usual, Dr. Wayne, our co-host.
Hi, BK. Hi, everyone.
So, very interestingly, today, this is take 2 of episode today. But sometimes it happens, and I had to restart the router and the network and everything, and hopefully it stays stable for now. But I guess it also brings across a point that when things don't work out, sometimes you just have to troubleshoot, just have to test out the reasons. And of course, for technical stuff, it is not as difficult because you kind of know the components that you can test. But I guess in network marketing and also in business, we also have certain components that we can test, which is probably a good idea, Dr. Wayne. We may want to talk about the components of network marketing in the future, right?
Yes, that would be great.
Yeah, we could
idea.
do that, right? We could definitely do that. So, an idea for the show. And of course, last week we talked about how to feel more complete by understanding the spiritual law of gender. And I kind of made a joke that it felt like it was a dating program or a dating podcast. But I guess it is relevant, and then Dr. Wayne is going to go over a bit of it later on as well. Right? But today we're going to learn about something new, something that I guess affects maybe 99% of us, right?
Yes, and it's kind of what we started off with regards to not being able to get on the internet, feeling stuck. We felt stuck there for a little bit.
And of course, if you want to catch our previous episodes, because we do have them archived at networkmarketerpodcast.com, you can check out our past episodes and as well as download the show notes, because Dr. Wayne has been very kind to have done all the show notes for us for the past 2 seasons, in fact, of episodes. So please do check us out, right? And let's get the show on the road today.
So today is about how to move forward when you feel stuck. And the law of abundance worked really, really well then. So what we were thinking about then actually ended up becoming a reality with our internet, which was quite funny. So as BK basically mentioned there before, that we last week we talked about how to feel complete by knowing the universal law of gender. And the law of gender is a mutable law. So mutable laws means that we can work with it to help us to feel or to help us to move forward in our life. And the law of gender is basically anything to do with masculine and feminine. So, of course, we have the sexes with regards to male and female. We have the opposites with regards to even plants and minerals, electrons, for example, and even the magnetic poles, for example, are examples of the law of gender. And we even went into looking at the soul and the ego. So the soul, when we're looking at the law of gender, is more feminine in its nature, and the ego is more dominating, therefore it's more masculine. Now, when we understand how all these interplay in our lives and we can feel these emotions come up, this is when we can then use them for us to be able to help us. For example, when something happens, like using what happened to us this morning, something happened, and then what happened then is we're in chaos. So this initial rock actually comes from the feminine energy, where emotionally we basically now feel as if we're in a little bit of turmoil. So we basically sat there for a little bit, didn't we, BK, wondering what could it be. We restarted my computer first to make sure it wasn't my end. I then did the simple thing of looking at speed tests to make sure my speed was okay. Then BK then went to his and closed down the software that we used, just making sure, then restarted that, but we still had a problem. And then we went, as BK mentioned, to the router. We found that the router basically allowed things then to work correctly, which was fantastic. So, using that as an example, initially when these emotions flood in, what are we going to do? What's going to happen? These are the emotions, looking at the law of agenda as the feminine energy. And the masculine energy then creates the plan. So the plan was, okay, step one, let's look at my computer. Step two, look at BK's computer. Try to get them to work. Step three, whoop, that didn't work. Now we go to basically the router. And this is where we can use this law agenda to help us to feel complete. Because when we really get this, and we spent a good half an hour going deep into this, this law, and when you understand it, you then feel complete because you know this universal law. And that's the beautiful part about knowing these 7 universal laws, because every one of them can then be easily implemented into our life to be able to get the dreams, to get the goals accomplished that we actually want. And we talked about in many of the episodes how when we align these universal laws, what happens then is we can literally collapse time, whereby if something is going to take maybe a 10-year plan, we can do it in 2 years or even 6 months or even faster than that when we totally understand this. So what we're going to move into now is how to move forward when you feel stuck. So anything you want to go through there first, BK, before we move into the next bit?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on and just say that a lot of things, especially because this is a mutable law, very interestingly, we can have a little bit of mastery over it, or we can gain mastery over something. Now, I just share a little bit of a story when I was still a teacher in the school. And at that time, I was the head of department of the certain department, right? And one of my IT support, he was the in charge of the IT support, and he came to me and asked me this question, a very interesting question. He said, "Hey, Mr. Tan, you never ever seem to have asked for IT support before, because every other teacher is like constantly calling us for help." And then I just said, "Well, I can fix it myself. Why? I mean, no need to trouble you guys, right?" And basically, I know that things can go wrong with an IT system and the computers, and I just troubleshoot them. So, of course, when we look at things that we are not familiar with, what happens is that a lot of times, like what Dr. Wayne say, we go into chaos. We kind of like, we feel a little bit anxious and agitated, and sometimes a bit frustrated and why things are not going wrong. But if we learn to practice even this art of troubleshooting and understanding that sometimes things do go wrong, and then we break it down into simple steps of like, okay, let's go back to step one. Let's go back one step. Does it fix the problem? Go back another step. Does it fix the problem? And go down the chain. And then you realize that by practicing this idea of being able to calmly troubleshoot, you allow the other side of your the law of gender to take over, right? So instead of feeling the chaos, you also feel the calmness and the control and the being able to try and resolve the issue. Now, but of course, I also want to kind of say that, interestingly, when you learn to play with both of these sides of the law, I also think that the female side, which gives you ideas to test, right? Like, for example, I was like, I just kind of stopped at restarting my computer. But then later on, something just popped into mind, say, why don't you restart the router as well, right? So that must have been from the more creative side of things. And of course, that helped to solve the issue eventually.
Yes, yeah, well put then. And literally, the very next words that I'm going to say is exactly what we did with this example that we did. It starts small, and that's what you said as well, BK. You start small. So how do we move forward when you feel stuck? So first of all, what I like to think of when you're feeling stuck, so say for example now you want to build a team, or you might feel stuck because you are not getting in contact with the leads that you should be, you're not following up, whatever the challenge may be. The first thing that I always look at personally is I look at my physical being. Because if you look at your physical being, a lot of the times people feel stuck in the mind because their physical being is stuck as well. So think of movement. What can you do? Just even move around. Do something that is, once again, being creative. It might be something different that you do, maybe doing some light squats or different arm exercises. Just try doing some movement. A nice thing to do also, if you've got time, if you've got a pool or if you've got a shower, have a cold shower. And something interesting, BK, that a lot of people find with health confusing is that they overcomplicate it. If anyone asks me a question, I often say that I just stand on the shoulders of giants, and I reflect back to what the ancients would have done, or what would have been available to them to help them to get through certain situations. And if you look at the cold, for example, hot and cold, and when you're in a room, hot temperature like BK is in Malaysia, a refreshing cold shower helps a lot. But if you're in, say, down south in Tasmania, or if you're really in a really cold environment where it snows, you might have a cold shower. You might have what would be lukewarm to someone in a freezing temperate zone, whereas that would be quite refreshing in BK's area as well. But the ancients never had hot. They never had really much heat in terms of hot water. But cold is refreshing. Cold actually resets the brain. It helps the brain to have focus and clarity. And every day, one of the things that I do is have a cold shower. I'll even immerse myself into cold for 5 minutes, even in winter. I'm a surfer, so I'm used to diving into cold, freezing water and staying out there for an hour. Yes, I may have a wetsuit on, but there's your feet and your hands and your face that's open to the weather. But just think of little things physically: movement, cold showers, even deep breathing, allowing you to just slow your breath down. And then even think of bitter foods. A lot of people say, what do you mean bitter foods? The interesting thing about food is that our body genetically for thousands and thousands of years knows what to do with bitter. And if you look at ancient Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, naturopathic medicine, bitter foods, bitter herbs are used for healing. Why? Because we've got 18 different receptors in our tube, from our mouth to our anus, for example, that knows what to do with bitter foods genetically. Like lemons or limes, or like fermented foods. And if you think of foods, even an apple is bittersweet, even a plum is bittersweet. And we know what to do with bitter foods, but we don't know what to do with sweet foods. We've only got 2 sweet receptors. Therefore, if you eat sweet, which could be carbohydrates in their packaged form, like biscuits or cakes or different types of foods like that, chocolate, ice cream, you'll notice you can eat a lot of that food and you still feel hungry. Where if you eat bitter foods, that doesn't happen. So say, for example, if you feel stuck, just have an apple beside you, chew on an apple, do something to allow that. And these bitter foods then allow you to alkalize. And the interesting thing with alkalizing is that it's been now proven that your memory and your clarity actually diminishes, and the brain can actually shrink. And if you look at an Alzheimer's brain compared to a normal brain, say a normal brain is this big, an Alzheimer's brain is about this big. I'm just looking at in terms of just simplicity. And one of the things that causes that is being acidic. So think of bitter foods with alkalizing. These are just simple things we can do. So for example, you feel stuck, you might do a little bit of movement. You then deep breath. You haven't got a shower, but you might just do some deep breath, and then eat an apple, for example. This changes your state. What we've got to try and do is change our state to then think of what we can then do to become unstuck.
Yeah, I think there was a study that kind of said that Alzheimer's, for example, is they call it type 3 diabetes.
Yes.
Yeah, so we have type 1, type 2, which is obviously related to how we manage our sugar levels, which is linked to insulin. But at the same time, there's a study that kind of suggested and showed that Alzheimer's, which is our brain, which is also an issue they call it type 3 diabetes, which is fairly interesting, right?
Yeah. So what happens is you don't get diabetes or blood sugar challenges. These foods, the carbohydrate type foods like biscuits and cakes and junk food and different foods that people eat, what happens is the body basically breaks it down. Yes, sugar is produced, but the problem with sugar, it opens up the blood-brain barrier. And when that occurs, it then actually, the toxins are no longer filtered by this blood-brain barrier, and the toxins go immediately into the brain. And these foods, usually the sweet foods, are very acidic, and it basically then creates diabetes 3 in its early infant stages. Is just, oh, where did I leave my keys? What was that person's name that I just, no, I can't remember that person's name, but in its more severe stage, it's Alzheimer's and dementia. And that's why they call it diabetes 3, because it actually skips the diabetes part of it. Now, some people get both. They go diabetes 2, and then they go into diabetes 3. So they have the diabetes complications, and they then also, unfortunately, get the Alzheimer's and dementia. It's quite interesting.
I guess it's also very identical to how we solve the problem. Like even, let's say we talk about health and business and taking one step back or taking one small step in changing something. It actually just puts us in the right direction. For example, even like what Dr. Wayne has been talking about health, which because if you are not feeling great, then you kind of feel stuck in your business as well, right? And I read somewhere the other day that somebody was saying that, one of the simplest things you can do for your health is to ensure that every meal that you are taking is a meal that is prepared by hands.
Yeah.
By human hands, right? So if every meal that you take is a meal that is prepared by human hands, chances of it being a lot more healthy is going to be way higher. That means you cut out a lot more processed stuff in your intake of food, and that is not something. I guess yes, it's a little bit more troublesome. You kind of need to, but it's not like a huge step to take, right? I mean, if you start to think about how you can do simple things at home and cook and making sure that food is cooked by hand, it actually can take you in the right step towards better health, and it doesn't have to be too difficult.
No, small steps, start small. And just going back to one of the sayings that we've said quite a lot throughout these podcasts, and just for anyone new that may be coming on board and listening for the first time today, is the ancients also say that the light of the universe or creative thought or becoming unstuck will not occur if the physical body is impure. So if we're eating packaged foods, so if you wake up and you're eating packaged foods like cereal for breakfast and you're getting the packaged milk, and then you're basically then opening up the packaged bread, and then for lunch you're having the bread with basically maybe peanut paste and a piece of some cheese, or whatever you're having that's coming out of the package, the body basically now becomes very toxic, and those toxins directly then go to the brain. And we now know from studies, ancient medicine's known this for thousands of years, but Western medicine is proving it, that the brain and the gut are connected. They say the brain is the first brain, and then the gut is the second brain. So what we put into our being is really important. But if you're someone who is eating incorrectly, or you shouldn't be eating certain foods, start small. Don't start big. Don't try and stop it all at once. Just try and do little steps at a time with the physical side of it. So we're going to be looking at the physical, the mental, and the emotional. So we've looked at the physical. Now the mental side of it, and this part here is just basic 101 with regards to any type of business. The first thing, being a business coach, one of the first things I ask people when I go into a business, what's your USP? What's your idea? Do you know your ideal client? USP is unique selling proposition. What is that is going to make you unique to your industry? And another way of putting it is, what is your ideal client? Know your ideal client. What age is your ideal client? What do they love? What do they enjoy? What are the reasons that they'll like to bring to take your product or to enjoy your product? And it's really important to know this person and write it down. As BK said before, the interesting thing is we Western civilization is about trying to make things simple in time. However, it has a challenge effect challenges that will then unfortunately affect us negatively. For example, BK mentioned before, the more that we can use our hands with cooking, the more we will eat what is naturally supposed to be for us. And it's the same with the computer. The computer is incredible in terms of how it can help us, but when we're typing, it does not use the same amount of neurons as when we're writing. So write down your ideal client. Yes, put it on the computer, but write it down so you actually know what your ideal client looks like, sounds like, smells like, what that person loves. Because then what happens is the law of attraction then works for you. And remember, the law of attraction doesn't mind what you think. So if you're thinking what your ideal client is, then your ideal client will be attracted to you. But if you don't have an ideal client, the law of attraction will then work for you in the opposite. I haven't got an ideal client, so your ideal client doesn't walk into your sphere of influence, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that when the reason they kind of said that one of the key ideas about why the people who succeed and the people who don't is that people who succeed have goals. They set down their goals. They write down what they want to achieve, and they write down the things that Dr. Wade has just been saying, the ideal clients, the USPs and all those things. But the reason why most people don't do it is because it actually requires a bit of, actually it's quite a lot of work. It requires work. It requires work for you to get those things done, right? Writing down your goals, planning, writing down USP, writing down your perfect customer avatar. All those things require work. But the thing is, because we kind of try to not do it because we can understand that it requires work, right? So this is an idea that I picked up from a book that I was reading, which is keeping a strategy journal, right? And if you keep a strategy journal, have multiple pages, right? So maybe you have one page for your goals, you have one page for your perfect customer avatar, you have one page for whatever things you are trying to achieve. And instead of thinking like I need to sit down and get this done 100% of the time, or get it done 100%. Maybe you could just take little steps. Okay, you just had the idea. Hey, I like a certain person, a certain kind of customer who is maybe very coachable, right? So that's an idea. Put it down, write it down first, right? And then you just have it could be a mind map, it could be a diagram, it could be a list, it could be anything, right? But under the page, under the strategy journal that you have, right, you can just pen down, okay, coachable, right? And then you have taken one step. And as you go about your day, and as all these ideas start popping into your mind, remember the law of gender, right? Your creative side sometimes will kick in, like just that, like what happened with us in the morning. My creative side saying, why don't you try restarting the router, which then I obviously promptly did. So that's the same idea, right? And as these things come to mind, and also because as you go about your day and you interact with people, and hey, I kind of like this person, he's independent, he's looking for his own answers and so on. So again, that is your soul, your spirit, or something inside you that's telling you that, yeah, this kind of people resonate with you. Then take out your strategy journal, open up to the page where it says my perfect customer avatar, and add on, right, coachable, and then next one is independent and seeks answers on his own, something like that, right? And as you go about it over time, you then obviously will build up a complete picture, which then is what you want to do anyway in the first place.
Yes, yeah, and that's a great way of piecing it all together, BK. Yep, awesome.
So today we had some challenges, but we overcame it, and we managed to put together something hopefully that's helpful to you, right? And we just like to thank you for your patience. Even though you don't really get to see the thing, but I think it's interesting. And then we want to share how we get things done so that you also can benefit from it. Because I think the whole idea of this podcast was obviously to also show that we can improve, right? And
Yes.
in those of you who have joined us from the start, you know that we have made many changes along the way.
Yes, and that's probably leads really nicely into the next bit, which is the emotionality of why we get stuck. So we've got to understand this side of it. So we've got to want to change. We've got to understand that we can change, okay? Embrace change. Embrace the unknown. Because when you do this, it's easier to move forward. However, there's a challenge. When you feel stuck, what generally happens is we go back into old thought, and remembering that there's around about 70,000 thoughts a day, 80% are pessimistic and 90% are about the past. So what we've got to then do is realize that from the law of gender, and then, as BK mentioned, allow the intuition to come through in a creative way to start small. So start small by being general. So say now you're feeling stuck, you're feeling heavy, you're feeling down, you just can't move forward. So then just think of something that allows you to feel happy. And that might be looking outside and you just see a flower or a plant that you planted a couple of weeks ago. Or it might be something that might be your loved one. It might be your favorite boat or a favorite car, but something that gives you joy in your heart. Something that gives you that allows you to feel happy, something that gives you gratitude that you have X or what it might be. It could be as simple as, like, I'm sitting here now and it's not raining, but say it is raining. I could, for example, then just say, how lucky am I to be in such a beautiful place in my office, and it's raining outside, and yet I am nice and warm inside. I feel so blessed that I have this around me. I feel so secure. I feel so embraced by this lovely room. The colors are just vibrant. I love the way the room is set out. So by being general, what happens then, can you feel what's happening now? I no longer feel stuck. I'm actually moving out of that negative energy and moving into a positive energy. And when that happens, your intuition will then drop a little, like BK said this morning. It dropped an intuitive thought. Why don't you try the router? It'll drop an intuitive thought that will then say, why don't you do this? What about that? You can move forward by doing this. So the more that we can do that, what happens then is, this is where we collapse time. This is where things happen that are just out of the blue, where we can now, it comes from the unknown, where we now can actually embrace change and change. And what happens then is, when that intuitive thought comes, which is the feminine, and we act on it due to the masculine, and we do that, because what can happen is some people don't do it, as BK mentioned before. If we do it, what happens then is that, because that comes from a different unknown space, it then actually creates ripples from the law of abundance side of thing. And when you ring that person up or do whatever is suggested, it just seems to magnify the end result. It's so incredible when you start looking at it from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think we kind of have to move away from the idea that I guess the media and of course people around us and success stories and companies will always highlight this concept of overnight success, right? Or they kind of seemingly have, like, oh, this person has achieved success in a super short time. We highlight such stories, but in essence, we don't hear behind the scene stories. And actually a lot of them, or every one of us, have taken many, many steps towards our success. And so we need to feel comfortable, and like the journey of a journey begins with a single step, right? A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And so this is something we need to get used to, right? If you feel that you want to do something, start really small, right? If it's even like in business, it's very daunting to think that, oh, I'm going to hit the highest possible rank in my business in X number of months. But actually, that begins with talking to one person, catching
Yeah.
up with one prospect, sending out a cold message to somebody you find interesting, right? So instead of thinking that I need to have this huge, massive team, start with thinking that I need to just talk to that one person today, that follow up with that one person, and so on. And those things are achievable, right? Those things are definitely achievable, and then they kind of compound, and they compound in effect, and obviously over time that will bring you the results you want, right? And
Yes.
I think too often we give ourselves excessive pressure to think that we need to achieve that high goal. Yes, you want to achieve that, and you need to set that as a waypoint. But I like the picture that we see sometimes, that success is a series of small little steps, right? There's a picture where the person puts two ladders against the wall, and then the one ladder is the rung, where the rungs are so widely spaced you can't even reach the next step. But whereas a normal size ladder, you find that the rungs are spaced in very small equidistant, so that you can actually climb one at a time. And that
Yeah.
is exactly how success can be reached, by taking the next step, and then the next step which is near to you. And that's what we're trying to say here.
Yes, start small, start small. So just bringing it all together now. So remembering, start small, start physical. Look at the physical, move. Think of a cold shower, or if you're in a really freezing climate, lukewarm, for example. Think of breath. Think of bitter foods. Mentally, know your ideal client, and emotionally, be general with your thoughts when you're feeling stuck. Really, really simple things, how to move forward when you feel stuck, that we can do every day to allow us to move forward in any business, and especially our network marketing business.
And of course, one of the small things you can do is to listen to a good recording, right? Whether it's an audible, a training, or even our podcast, right? Because
Yeah.
nothing's more difficult. I mean, it's not there's nothing too difficult about hitting the play button, right? So do subscribe to us on our regular channel. We are actually available on Apple Podcasts and other places as well, where you can find good podcasts. Just look out for Candid Conversations about network marketing. And of course, if you want to check out the archive episodes, we are at networkmarketerpodcast.com. And if you really want to jump head into some of these spiritual laws that we talk about, we do have a program at 5hiddenreasons.com, where we talk about why most network marketers fail in their network marketing business, and why you do not have to. So I think we have a nice wrap up today. Dr. Wayne, thank you so much. I will see you next week.
Thanks, BK. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.